when this first came as an issue under, I think, Penny Mordaunt 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was about 12.5% of the youth between 18 to 24 said that they would serve if there were a war. Now, that's 75,000 of each of that age group from 18 to 24. So it's not as bad as people think. And I think if it was an existential threat, then I think more people probably would serve.
Chief of the Defence Staff has said UK citizens need to get ready for an attack by Russia and may have to make sacrifices. In a speech at the military think tank RUSI, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton said,
"It's a little Churchillian, this. Sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a role to play, to build, to serve, and if necessary, to fight. And more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means."
So do we all need to think about our role in keeping the country safe? Major General Chip Chapman, who had been senior British military advisor to US Central Command, joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
Do you agree then that there is a risk of direct action and attack from Russia on the UK? The Air Chief Marshal puts it at 5%. Do you agree with him?
Well, we look at probability yardsticks in the intelligence community, and 5% is more than highly unlikely. So it's a very small percentage. But I think the two most important factors one actually needs to look at is, what do you think is Russia's intent in the future? And the second one is, what prevents war and keeps the peace? Now, what has kept the peace in the time of the Cold War, and we're probably in a period of hybrid war at the moment, is deterrence. And deterrence has three parts. It's signalling, multiplied by capability, multiplied by resolve. And what the CDS has said, and Mark Rutte last week, is that we need to use all efforts to prevent a war, and that we need to switch to a wartime mindset, because too many countries are quietly complacent. That's what this is about. And as Mark Milley reminded us, who was the chairman of the American Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2018, there are myths that we need to let go of. The first one is, wars will be short. They might not. And one of the things that Ukraine has taught us really is that wars can be long. Secondly, that the scale of Ukraine is out of sync with our recent thinking and experience. And thirdly, it's not armies that fight wars, it's nations that fight wars, because ultimately it's your total means given and multiplied by your strength of will, which gives you your power of resistance. That is why, for example, the Russians attack the energy grid. If you implode the will of the people, then you will collapse the ability to fight. It is that aspect of all society resilience that the Chief of the Defence Staff is really talking about.
So in that context, and I think all of those things are really important points to make in the context of this discussion, do you think people, all of us, need to consider this, the threat of a potential war, more in our everyday lives? And do we need to start thinking seriously, and does the government need to start thinking seriously about the idea of conscription?
Well, they're two separate questions. So the answer to the first question is yes, we need to start thinking more seriously about that. The answer to the second question is probably not yet. So if you look at the German model, or what they're going to go to in the future, they're going to have a voluntary register by 2027 to see who is willing to serve, and then go for a medical examination of those who are willing to serve. Now, again, the number of people who are willing to serve alters with what the perception of an existential threat is. So I'm not sort of as pessimistic as most people. When this first came as an issue under, I think, Penny Mordaunt 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was about 12.5% of the youth between 18 to 24 said that they would serve if there were a war. Now, that's 75,000 of each of that age group from 18 to 24. So it's not as bad as people think. And I think if it was an existential threat, then I think more people probably would serve. Because I think there's an interesting paradox in Germany, for example. Now, Germany's history absolutely is, when Russia invaded Ukraine overtly in 2022, was all about the utility of force versus the futility of force. And that's what we really want to get to the futility of force of Russia in Ukraine. And the paradox is that the greatest supporters of Ukraine were those on the left wing of sort of German politics, because of the fact that Russia had gone against everything to do with human rights and democracy. It's the right wing who are those who are most supportive of Russia.
I think, though, the question that lots of people ask, and I'm heartened to hear that you think people in that situation would be more willing to put themselves forward to do that duty. The responses that we often get, and especially from listeners, is people feel that the patriotism has been eroded a bit in this country, that maybe there isn't still the same sense there that we owe something to the country. And we could look across lots of different areas to maybe study that reaction. But there is a fear that, if something were to happen, a lot of people might just hold their hands up and say, it's not really my problem, or they might leave. You're more optimistic.
Well, some of that may also pertain, but if I was to give you three characteristics of an aimless, apathetic and lacking in drive youth, you'd probably say that's a description of today's youth. It's not. It's what people thought of the feckless youth in the 1930s, which became the greatest generation. So, people's perception of what happens is often different than reality when there is this existential threat. What the key point is, if you look at, for example, the greatest intelligence community in the world is the American community. At the House Armed Services Committee meeting on the 11th of June, General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked, will Putin stop at Ukraine? His answer was, I don't believe so. How do we prevent the war after the war? The best way to do that is deterrence. It has not been in Europe that Europe has been incapable of defending itself. It's been unwilling to defend itself, and there's a difference between the two.
Major General Chip Chapman, thank you so much for joining us on the programme this morning. Really great to have you with us.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
There was that Oxford Union debate, wasn't there, in the 30s? This House would defend, would fight for king and country, and it was defeated. And everyone said, exactly what Chip Chapman said of the feckless youth. And then, of course, they went to fight. But it's probably not as straightforward as you were about. The Nazi threat was a very present threat on the coastline of the country, and therefore you're conscripted to fight against that enemy. Russia might be looming. The question is, are we willing to...
Do we feel it?
Yeah, do we feel it? Do we pay more? Are we willing to pay more tax? Are we willing to say everyone of the age of 18 to 21 has to do a year of some form of national service?
I'm really interested. We have quite a lot of listeners who've been in the military, who've been in the armed forces. And there's one person here, Richard, who says he's ex-army. Prepared to fight for what? To secure our borders, to protect our nation, our lifestyle, for a government that cares more about, Richard says, foreigners than its own sick and elderly. No child of mine will be sent to fight for this deceitful, woke parliament. And that's somebody who was in the military. Now, there are other people who say they don't agree. They think that people would sign up, and including some people who say they would be more than willing to. We had somebody a couple of days ago, just off their own bat, say, I'm too old to serve, but I'd be more than willing to do anything else you asked me to do. I'd serve on a train platform, I think, wasn't it? Wanted to help on the trains.
The problem is that the idea of a Russian threat is now so part of the wallpaper. And because the Russian threat might manifest itself in cyber attacks, which no one really fully necessarily grips with. It won't necessarily be bombs hurtling over the cities of this country. But therefore, it enters part of the wallpaper. And the question then follows, would we really take it seriously enough to say, we collectively change completely what we think about being British?
Because we haven't really yet.
We've not done that in generations. If you go to Estonia, you go to certain countries in that part of the world, they do say part of being a citizen is at the weekend you go and learn how to cut a communication line because the Russians could come over at some point.
Am I right in saying even Switzerland has a civilian army? Is that right? Yes, Dominic O'Connell's in the studio nodding at me. So, and actually the Swiss government tweeted a couple of days ago saying, they're looking into the increased threat and what it might mean for their government, and they're doing a bit of research into what it means for them.
I think the Estonian Prime Minister at the weekend goes off and serves in the army. I think that's what
that's true.
I think that's what they do as well. So whether that's actually going to be, but I don't think we're going to reach panic stations, but that's the question. That's what the military is saying. We're going to need to reach it relatively soon. 033003235. Can you ever imagine a country in which national service of some form or other returns? You can let us know what you think.